May it please the court, counsel. On February 22nd, Jose Ibarra put on a black hat, a hoodie-style jacket, and some black kitchen-style disposable gloves, and he went hunting for females on the University of Georgia's campus. And in his hunt, he encountered 22-year-old Laken Riley on her morning jog. And when Laken Riley refused to be his rape victim, he bashed her skull in with a rock repeatedly. That is what this case is all about. The evidence will show that Laken fought. She fought for her life. She fought for her dignity. And in that fight, she caused this defendant to leave forensic evidence behind. She also marked her killer for the entire world to see. The forensic evidence that he left behind in this fight is his DNA, and only his DNA and Laken's, underneath Laken's right fingernails. He also left behind in a struggle with her over her phone, because the court will hear that she called 911. He left behind his left thumbprint on her iPhone, which was found not far from her body at the crime scene. And it is that forensic evidence alone that would give you enough evidence to find him guilty as charged on the counts in this indictment. But the evidence in this case will come in basically three forms. There'll be forensic evidence, there will be digital evidence, and there will be video evidence. And all three forms of those evidence will point to one person, Jose Ibarra, as the killer of Laken Riley. And this is not working. We'll start with a timeline, and the timeline is established by a lot of the digital evidence that you're going to hear about. And for Laken, that timeline begins basically at 9:03 in the morning. At 9:03 on Thursday, February 22nd, Laken Riley did something that she does all the time, and she went out for a morning jog. She lives not far from the crime scene, and Your Honor is going to see several maps in this case, and you will see that where Laken Riley lived, where the defendant lived, where our other victim, who you're going to hear from in this trial, Tasia Swee, lived, Building S at the University of University of Georgia Student Housing, and where items of evidence were dumped in this case, and where Laken was murdered. It's all clustered together, and it's all clustered together within about a half-mile radius of one another. And you'll see several maps throughout this case. But she left her house at 9:03 in the morning. We know that for several reasons. She was captured on her Ring doorbell, and you'll see that video through our first witness. And she also was captured on a trail cam that becomes very important in this case. And at about 9:05 a.m., she's captured running from her house down Rogers Road, eventually towards the crime scene where she encounters this defendant. She is running, as you will see, with a few things that are important. 2 AirPods, and they are noise-canceling AirPods, and her phone, her iPhone, is in her left hand. She's wearing typical running clothes, and you're going to hear a little bit about how she runs, what she runs with, because these things are important to judge what eventually happened between her and this defendant on the trail. She wears typically very tight running clothes because that's what's comfortable when you run, so it doesn't get it doesn't come off or get loose when you're running. And so this particular day, she's wearing running tights, white Hoka shoes, and 3 layers of clothing on her top. She's wearing a running bra, a shirt, and a tight black Lululemon jacket when she leaves her house. At 9:11 a.m. exactly, Laken is a few minutes into her run, And we have some digital data, which we'll talk to you about, which is a Garmin watch that Laken had gotten for Christmas that she's wearing on her run. And this watch captured a lot of important data that you're going to hear about. But she is on her run, and her phone, she activates the emergency function of her iPhone, and you're going to hear about that through testimony of the witnesses who examined her phone. She activates the emergency function of her iPhone, and she attempts to call 911, and she in fact does call 911. Her call is connected to ACCPD. At 9:12, you'll hear that the call was hung up, and I'm going to play the call for you. At 9:12, the call was hung up by the caller, not the 911 center. The 911 center did not hang up on Laken Riley. The phone hung up. And at 9:12, they tried to call her back, and there was no answer. This is an enhanced version of the 911 call, and there will be several stipulations between the parties in this case. We will execute a waiver of them as they come in. One of the stipulations was that this 911 call was sent to the FBI in Quantico, where they attempted to enhance the call. And this is a 1 minute and 8 second call, and this is the enhanced version of that call. And I'd like the court, when listening to the call, right about 55 seconds into the call, you're going to hear a voice.
Clark County 911. Hello, this is Clark County 911. Hello, Clark County 911. Can anyone hear me? Clark County 911.
Yo Tango. There is a long break in what happens next. It was Laken's mom, who Laken usually talks to on her run, who started calling Laken at around 9:06 that morning. And you'll just see the call logs from that and the evidence of that through Laken's phone. And when she could not reach Laken, she began calling Laken's 3 roommates. And you'll meet all 3 of them: Lily Steiner, Sophia Magana, and Connolly Huff. All 3 of them are University of Georgia students at the time. They were all seniors. And Laken herself was at UGA, but had recently transferred to the University of Augusta Athens campus because she wanted to be a nurse. But the 4 of them still live together. And the roommates are all, I would say, technologically savvy and security savvy. And they all 4 had iPhones. And there's a function with an iPhone called Find My iPhone, which you can share your location with other people. And the 4 ladies in that house, roommates, shared their digital location with one another 24/7. And so when Allison Phillips, Laken's mom, began calling and looking for Laken, she notified all the roommates. And then the roommates started checking the Ring door camera, checking for Laken, texting Laken, calling Laken, and no response. I will say that this particular day, February 22nd, 2024, happened to be the day where there was a widespread phone outage by AT&T. And so some of the girls did have AT&T as their service provider. Laken did not. She is Verizon. And so the girls were having phone problems due to that widespread outage. And so you'll hear about how that kind of interfered with their ability to really find where she was. But eventually, they could not find her. They could not find her for hours. And even though Laken would go out on long runs, she always had her phone with her, so they became concerned. So at around 11:30 on the day of her murder, two roommates, Sophia and Lily, went and walked the trails back behind the intramural fields at the University of Georgia where Laken used to run, but they also had her digital profile. And her digital profile put her in the middle of the Oconee Forest, and they had noticed that she had not moved. She had not moved for hours. And so they walked to where they could last see her digital profile, and the two roommates found one of Laken's AirPods. They photographed it, they collected it, they went back to their house where they could have Wi-Fi to connect because they had no phone service in the forest and an outage was on. And at 12:05 p.m., they called the University of Georgia police and reported that Laken Riley was missing. So it isn't until the police respond immediately, and they take that digital profile, and you'll meet Sergeant Maxwell. He is the officer that found Laken's body. And it takes him, even with her digital profile, this is a very forested area. And she obviously wasn't on the running trail. She was off the running trail. And it took him about 25 minutes, even with her digital profile, for him to locate her. And he did locate her, and you're going to see the body cam footage of him locating her. And what he found when he found her is that she was hidden kind of almost under a tree and covered up with a bunch of leaves. The first thing he noticed was that her breasts were completely exposed. All three layers of her top clothing were pulled up above and around her neck. He also noticed that her running tights, which she typically wears above her navel, were pulled down and her underwear was protruding from her tights. He also noticed severe injuries to the left side of her head. He began immediately trying to save her life, but he could tell that she was dead. She was cold. But he began CPR, and you will see the efforts of him and several other University of Georgia police officers where they try to save her. They have to move her out of this area so that they could get her flat on the ground. They give her chest compressions. They give her CPR. They put those pads on her chest to try to start her heart. Eventually, the fire department and EMS comes and they do the same, and they work her for several minutes, but she is dead. She is dead, and there was nothing they could do to stop it or help her. You'll see the crime scene measurements. The crime scene in this case was worked by the GBI in conjunction with UGA-PD. You will hear in this case from GBI, UGA-PD, FBI, and ACC-PD. The four of them really in conjunction worked this case. And the crime scene, importantly, when they get there, there's really very few items there. But item number one, where you see on the trail, is the other AirPod that Laken was wearing at the time that she was running. And then they saw a disturbed area of leaves to a point where they found two rocks and a tree, both of whom have, or all three of which have Laken's blood on them. And then Laken's body was a few feet away from that, where you see the green there. And then her phone was not found near her body. It was found where you see item number 8, which is the other tree that you see there. But her person was taken 64 feet off that trail. So from where AirPod is, item number 1, to where you see items 2, 3, and 4 is 65 feet. So in legal terms, he aspirated her 64 feet off of that trail so that he could attempt to victimize her. This is the crime scene, and you'll see how wooded it is and why it took Sergeant Maxwell so long to find her, even though he did have her digital profile. And in here, this photo is actually the phone. And so it took them a really long time to find the phone. They were calling the phone, they were pinging the phone. Her phone was on silent, so they couldn't hear it. It wasn't until it got dark that they could find her phone, but they kept looking for her phone because they knew the phone was there. And they found it. And when they found it, this is what Daniela Stewart of the GBI saw on her iPhone, exactly where your thumb would be if you go to hang up a call on an iPhone. So at the bottom of the iPhone, she found this latent print in blood. They processed the phone immediately, And that latent print was sent to ACCPD. And we'll talk about that a little later. And here's some of the Garmin data. And there are some things that we will never know about exactly what happened between Jose Ibarra and Laken Riley on that trail, but we know enough. And what we know is that at 9:10 a.m. from her Garmin that she was wearing, as she is trucking along and she is clipping 7-minute miles, she's running, doing her thing, listening to music, something happens. He does something to her to make her stop dead in her tracks. She initiates the SOS function on her phone and calls 911, and she immediately stops. And after that, you'll see some of this Garmin data, her movement, because it went to the FBI CAS team. They're the ones that analyzed it, and you'll hear about it. She's on this trail with this defendant for about 4 minutes, and then you see 4 minutes later, her Garmin move 65 feet into the woods, and there's some additional movement of her along that time, and her heart rate is still going until 9:28 a.m. Her encounter with him was long. Her fight with him was fierce, and that is what the Garmin data shows. And once her heart stops at 9:28 a.m., there's no more movement from her Garmin. So what happens next? Well, UGA PD leave, and they really got nothing other than a peeping Tom incident that had occurred on campus at 7:57 a.m. And I'm going to talk to you about that one last. So what they do is, it is a combination of good police work and luck, pure luck. But they start dumpster diving. ACCPD is dumpster diving, UGA PD is dumpster diving, GBI is dumpster diving, FBI is dumpster diving. Everybody is just looking into every dumpster in the Athens area for anything because they had nothing. And at a dumpster, at an apartment complex where he lived, a police officer named Zach Davis of ACCPD finds this hoodie jacket. And when he looks in and sees it, it's in a recycling bin, and it's standing out because it's right on top, and he noticed it had long, dark hair on it, wrapped around one of the buttons, and he could see blood. And he thought that was suspicious. So he calls UGA PD. They respond at 9 o'clock on the day of Laken's murder. They collect the jacket found in the dumpster, and they send it immediately to the GBI Crime Lab indicator for testing. But while they're there, they notice, they look around and see that one of the residents in this apartment, and B32, had what's called a Eufy camera, which is like a Ring camera but works a little different, had a camera aimed at that dumpster. And so they asked the resident that night, hey, can we come in? Can we see your camera? He agreed to let them see it, and this is what they saw. At 9:44 in the morning, about 15 minutes after Laken Riley's heart stopped, this is what they see. So they saw an individual who they did not know who it was at the time, dump the jacket in the dumpster and go to those bushes there and dump something there. So they go to the bushes, and this video has been enhanced, and I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of testimony about this video, enhanced the best they could by GBI Cyber. And I know the court sat through some motions to suppress where this black Adidas hat, there was a lot of discussion about, and you're going to hear more about all of those things. But this is an image that they locked in on and began to circulate around the neighborhood, or as the cops call a bolo. Be on the lookout for this individual. They didn't know who he was, and they circulated that. But they did go also that night, still the night of February 22nd, to the bushes, and they found 3 black disposable kitchen gloves. And those gloves were also sent immediately to the crime lab. And one of the interesting things about the black disposable gloves, when they got to the crime lab and they were analyzed, this is a picture taken at the crime lab, is that on the thumb of the gloves, there was a hole. There's also other holes in the gloves, and they found them. But on the thumb area of one of the gloves that the crime lab examined, they found a hole. And they also found blood, and that blood was later to be determined to be Laken Riley's blood on those gloves. So I've already told you about the geographic locations. They're all clustered. You can see in this map, the crime scene is up the top in the middle, called body crime scene. The dumpster where the items were found is marked. Building S is right by the bus stop, and then Laken Riley lived further up, Millage Avenue, towards the top of this photo. But the distance between the Building S, which will become important, and Laken Riley's body is about 300 yards. The distance between the dumpster and Laken Riley's body is about 500 yards. And the distance between the dumpster and the bus stop, and where the defendant lived, because he lived in that apartment complex, is about 150 yards. Everything is close together. So what happened next in the investigation is that the very next morning, on Friday, February 23rd, at 8:32 a.m., as ACCPD, again, is just looking out for anything, they had the bolo at that point, they encounter a person named Diego Ibarra. And Diego Ibarra is wearing a black Adidas hat that has some interest to them, which is they believe to be the identical hat that they had seen in the video the night before. And I will tell you this, on that hat that Diego Ibarra was wearing the next day is Laken Riley's blood. So their theory that that was in fact the same hat was absolutely correct. So they encounter Diego Ibarra. He gives them a fake green card. They know it's fake because it has 2 different dates of birth on it. And so they ask him to go back to his residence, and they begin talking to him. UGAPD arrives, and they begin to take over the scene. From the information that they had gotten from Diego Ibarra, they knew that hat was a hat seen in the video because of the proximity of the crime. And at some point, Diego began telling them he's got brothers in the house sleeping, and there were many communication difficulties at first because the first responding officers did not speak Spanish. No one in this apartment, D126, could speak English. So at some point, UGA brought 2 of their Spanish-speaking officers on scene, and the communication became a little easier. Officer Bridges, Officer Sand, both of whom are native speakers of Spanish, arrived and began taking over the communications. When they get there, they are attempting to secure the residence for a warrant, and before they could do a security sweep to secure the residence for a warrant, Jose Ibarra, who's in the middle in this slide, comes out with a garbage bag in his hand. He eventually gives officers consent to enter the residence, and when Sergeant Epps enters the residence, he sees Jose Ibarra asleep in the bed. And that is how he's been identified in this case. You will see there are 5 residents that lived in apartment D126. Jose Antonio Ibarra, this defendant, also goes by the name of Victor, which will be important because a lot of the communications within his phone and some of the witnesses just call him Victor. So Jose Ibarra is Victor. It is in fact the same person. Diego Ibarra is Jose's older brother, goes by the name of El Gocho, is a nickname that many people, including this defendant, call him El Gocho. Argenis goes by Manny, and Rosbelli Flores Bello goes by La Gorda, and then Juan Carlos Diaz Hernandez they call Carlito. And I suspect the state will tell you right now you're going to hear from Rosbelli in that residence. You will also hear that all the residents, Diego, Argenis, and Rosbelli, at least those three, are currently in federal custody on some immigration issues. But we are going to produce Rosbelli to testify to the court about the things that she saw and observed that day. And it is Rosbelli who identifies Jose Ibarra from the dumpster video. The officers, when they saw Jose Ibarra that day, saw that he had many injuries to him. Scratches on his arm, scratches on his wrist, scratches on the back of his neck, scratches on his hand. And they photographed those injuries to him. And then they began to do an additional canvass of this entire apartment complex. There are multiple buildings in this apartment complex, A, B, C, D, and E. Multiple teams of agents began going around looking for cameras, talking to residents. What do they know? What do they not know? And one of the things that they found is that the Ibarras lived at D126. Right next to them is D125, and right next to D125 is D124. 124 had a ring camera. 125 had a still camera. And they went and collected videos from those two apartments. And importantly, on the day that Laken Riley was murdered, at 10:21 a.m., Jose Ibarra is captured on D124 coming out of his apartment with a bag, and now his clothes have changed. He's wearing different clothes than he was wearing about 40 minutes ago. And he has a bag in his hand, and he's walking towards a dumpster, another dumpster in their apartment complex. And that dumpster, by the way, had been emptied the day of the murder. So when the officers went to check that dumpster had nothing in it for them. But in the next door neighbors, still camera shot at 10:24 a.m., 3 minutes later, Jose Ibarra is walking back towards his apartment, empty-handed, nothing in his hand. So they searched the residence that day, and they found a few things of significance. Number one, they found 3 more black disposable kitchen gloves, which were sent to trace evidence for plastics and polymer examination, and they concluded that they had originated from the same source as the gloves that were recovered in the bushes. They recovered 2 of the defendant's Samsung cell phones, which you will hear some evidence out of, but they also found no bloody clothing, no bloody anything, and the shirt and the satchel that you see the defendant wearing in the video, the dumpster video, were never found. They're not in that residence. So what other forensic evidence? The parties will stipulate to the prior Daubert hearing that this court has heard, so we will not be recalling the fingerprint evidence, but we will have a stipulation with the transcript and all of the exhibits that thumbprint, latent print that was on the phone, was sent to ACCPD that night. And eventually, the digital image of that thumbprint on Laken Riley's phone was compared to Diego Ibarra, Argenis Ibarra, Rosbelli, and Juan Carlos, and they were all excluded. They didn't leave that thumbprint behind. And it was matched to this defendant, Jose Ibarra. It is Jose Ibarra's left thumb on Laken Riley's phone. And the analyst or the expert who did that analysis testified at the Daubert hearing. He showed the court 15 points of comparison that he found, and his results were peer-reviewed by another examiner. They were peer-reviewed blind, and she agreed with him. There's also DNA in this case, and you're going to hear about 3 different types of DNA: traditional, YSTR, and true allele. All true allele is probabilistic genotyping, but it is a computer software program that deconvolutes or separates complex mixtures of DNA. That's what true allele does. But before you can go to true allele, you have to start with traditional DNA. So all of the items of evidence that you're going to hear DNA results from started with the traditional DNA. They were swabbed, they were amplified, they were quantified, all the things that you do with regular DNA. But we do have some regular DNA results in this case. First and foremost, the jacket. The jacket found in the dumpster has blood on it, and in the blood for traditional DNA is Laken Riley's DNA and this defendant's DNA, and only the two of them. Jose Ibarra and Laken Riley's blood are on the jacket that he dumped in the dumpster. The rocks and the trees from the crime scene, they were also processed for DNA, for latent prints, and for everything we got. But on the rocks in the tree, just Laken's DNA, Laken's blood on the rocks in the tree. They attempted at first, which is protocol, to do what's called YSTR DNA testing on Laken's fingernails. So both her left and her right hands were swabbed by the medical examiner in this case, and they were both sent to DNA for analysis. YSTR is a better fit for trying to separate male and females because only males have Y chromosomes, and so they attempted YSTR first and they were successful. The problem with YSTR, and the officers did gather the DNA of Jose Ibarra, Diego Ibarra, and Argenis Ibarra. They are brothers, and blood brothers share the same paternal line, and they share the same YSTR profile, unless there's a genetic mutation. And what the lab found when they tested the fingernails of Laken Riley is that, first of all, the left hand, there's nothing. No DNA of any other person other than Laken. But on her right hand, there was male DNA. And for the YSTR testing that they tried first, Jose Ibarra could not be excluded as the donor of that YSTR profile, and neither could Argenis, because, again, they're blood brothers, they share the same YSTR profile. But Diego could be excluded, and that's because Diego carries a genetic mutation that the lab was able to see, and he was able to be excluded as the donor of YSTR profile underneath Laken's nails. But after the YSTR was done, it was then sent to True Allele, along with a lot of other items. And when True Allele tested, and the data was sent into the True Allele program. It didn't test it, but when the data was sent into the True Allele program, True Allele excluded Argenis as the donor. True Allele excluded Diego, who had already been excluded by STR anyway, but True Allele matched Jose Ibarra to the DNA underneath Laken's right fingernails, to this likelihood ratio, which I have before the court here. 10 billion times more probable than a coincidental match. I will tell you the gloves that were tested, that's all just Laken's blood, the black gloves that were in the bushes. There's a straw that was tested, that is the defendant's blood. I want to talk to you about that a little later. And then the hat, the black Adidas hat, is also Laken's blood. And then the jacket also did contact swabs. So in addition to the blood on the jacket, they did contact swabs that were sent to True Allele. And again, it's the defendant and Laken on the jacket. But importantly on this dark blue jacket, also Laken's hairs that were wrapped around the button were sent to trace evidence. They are consistent with Laken Riley's hair, and of course it's consistent with her long dark hair and all the microscopic analysis on it. Her DNA is on that jacket, so there's really no need to do DNA on the hair because her DNA is already on the jacket in the form of blood, but they looked microscopically at her hair and it was consistent with her hair. But the important thing they found about several of the hairs, I believe over 15 of them, is that they were forcibly removed from her head. They did do a sexual assault kit on Laken, and several things were tested. But the bottom line is her entire sexual assault kit was negative for male DNA. Her clothing was looked at with AP, P30, you'll hear about that. There was no semen present. However, her underwear was sent to the trace evidence section as well, where they concluded that her underwear had been forcibly torn. So the medical examiner, Laken was sent to GBI headquarters in Atlanta or Decatur, where Dr. DeMarco conducted an autopsy on her the very next day after her murder. What the medical examiner found is that Laken had depressed skull fracture on the left side of her head, and she had 8 other lacerations on the left side of her head, which literally look like holes. She had a small subarachnoid hemorrhage on the right side of her head, and she had multiple abrasions to her face, her neck, and her torso. She also had what's called petechia in both eyes, which is consistent with some form of asphyxia. And asphyxia can come in many forms. It can be a drowning, but most importantly in this case, it can be a form of strangulation. It can be manual, it can be ligature, it can be all kinds of things. But what the medical examiner said in this case is that Laken Riley died as a result of the effects of blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxia in OS, not otherwise specified. She can't really say if it was from chest compressions, maybe manual strangulation, but there was something going on in this struggle where this defendant deprived her brain of oxygen for long periods of time. And that was her cause and manner of death. But I want to talk to you about something that happened before, and it is count 10 of the indictment, and it's a peeping Tom. Shortly before 7 a.m., Jose Ibarra is seen on a trail cam, and this is a version of the trail cam, or this is the angle you'll see. And you'll see an individual, and the state will be the first to tell you this video quality is not fantastic. But there's more than just this video. You'll see an individual wearing a dark hoodie, eventually a dark hat, black gloves, and holding a styrofoam cup. And UGA attempted to enhance this video. GBI Cyber attempted to enhance this video. This is about as good as it gets. You can see a bag. They've studied this video 1,000 times. You'll hear the things that they saw in looking at these videos. The male is seen on the trail cam exiting the defendant's apartment complex. That's how he gets onto the trail. It's further beyond outside the scope of this exact clip. But he gets on through a path from the defendant's apartment complex to this trail that leads onto campus. And this is Rogers Road. This is UGA Village housing for graduate students. And this is a bus stop that's used by students to take the bus to get to a class. At 7:01 a.m., this individual is seen at this door that you're going to see in the bottom or the middle of your screen. That's apartment 114. And in that apartment, 114, building S, lives a graduate student. She's an Indian national. Her name is Tejaswi Sarathi, and she is here at the University of Georgia studying. This defendant is seen trying to open her door at 7 o'clock in the morning. And there's about an hour's worth of video that was watched by UGA PD that between 7:01 a.m. and 7:57 a.m. on the 22nd day of February 2024, about 70 minutes before Laken Riley is murdered, this defendant goes to the door of apartment 114 6 times. Twice they can see on video that he attempts to open her door. And at one point you'll see in the video where he ducks down. And that is because at some point the student inside heard him at her door, and she approaches him at the door and says, "Excuse me." And she will testify to this court that when she said that, she's looking out her peephole, he ducks down. And you can actually see that on the video. And just here's a portion of her 911 call where she calls at 7:57.
And what's going on? I was in the shower and then I heard some noises and I came to check that someone was, I saw through the peephole. Someone was trying to open the door. And then I said, "Excuse me," and then they just ran away, and then now they kept trying to look through my window. Okay, and what's going on?
So she says she was in the shower and she heard her door jiggling. And she said that somebody was at her door. She says, "Excuse me," he ducks down and he tries to look through her back window and does look through her back window. This is her back window. This is the backside of Building S, and this is exactly how it was that morning. This is body cam footage of Officer Bridges, who's one of the officers that responded. Her blinds are open wide. They're open, not only open, but they're pulled up more than halfway. The right side is her living room. The left side window is her bedroom. Wide open, her blinds were that morning. She said that's how she kept it because it was kind of a dark place, and it was more comfortable for her to have some light in. And that's how her windows were. And she said when she turned around, she could see the person who she can't identify. We'll be the first to tell you she can't identify him. She didn't get a good look at his face. He had that hat over his face. He had a hood on. She describes the clothing, dark hat, dark jacket. Didn't get a look at his face because when she looked through the peephole, he ducked down. But she could see him peeping into her window, looking into her window. So the FBI CAS team is a specialized team with federal government that analyzes digital evidence. And they were brought in this case to look at data from the defendant's phone, the victim's phone, cell phone records, all of these things. And some of the data that they got from the defendant's cell Samsung, one of them, which is 1B7, which you'll hear a lot from, is called Rubin data. And Rubin data is something that's collected by Samsung, and the FBI CAS team analyzed the Rubin data, looked at the Rubin data in this case, and at the time of the peeping at Tasia Swee's apartment, the defendant's 1B7 phone is right over her house. And these are the digital points by the FBI. But also, there is a white styrofoam cup. In the video, you could see black gloves and the white styrofoam cup of the peeping. This cup was found by UGA PD as they were coming onto the trail to come to Laken Riley's scene. They thought it was unusual because there's no trash out there usually, and it's just sitting there. They collected the cup, and you can see in this next image, if you see where the retaining pond is in the middle of the screen, the cup is near there. So in between Building S, where Tasia Sweet lived, and in between where Laken Riley's body was found, was this white cup. That white cup was collected and sent to the crime lab at the GBI, and it is the defendant's DNA on the straw of that white cup in between the two crime scenes. So also, out of his phone and out of his social media, the defendant, when he woke up that morning, kind of did us a huge favor and started taking pictures of himself. And here are the pictures that he took of himself and posted on Snap, and also can be found on his phone. And one was taken at 4:30 a.m., the second one was taken at 5:37 a.m., and you see in that one that he is wearing the black Adidas cap with the stickers on it, with the same jacket, with the hoodie. Also, he took pictures of himself wearing the same shirt that you see in the video of B32 and the bag that was never found that you see on the side of him in some of the videos taken on the day of Laken's murder. And also you can see from, again, D124 and D125, the day before the murder, he is wearing the evening before the murder, so this is the 21st at 9 p.m. He's wearing the same clothes. So in the end, Your Honor, that is a summary of the evidence that the state has in this case. You will hear forensic evidence. You will hear digital evidence. You will see videos, all pointing to the same conclusion, that this defendant murdered Laken Riley, and he also peeped Tasia Swee's apartment. At the close of all the evidence, we are going to ask that you find him guilty on every count of this indictment, because the state will be able to prove every bit of it. And we ask that with your verdict, the close of the evidence, that you bring justice to Laken, Tasia Sweet, and this community. Thank you.